Hi, we're here today to talk about Cois Nore and Cois Nore Cancer Support Services and the incredible work they do in Kilkenny for the community, for people who have had that diagnosis of cancer and for their families. But the way we're going to do that today is we're going to hear from people directly impacted by a cancer diagnosis and people who, in the wake of that diagnosis, were helped by Cois Nore. Jackie is with me first. Jackie, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Listen, thanks a million for having the chat with us today. You might kind of bring us back and tell us a little bit about your own story, how cancer came into your lives.
Okay. A year and 9 months ago, I had a routine mammogram, and 6 weeks later I was diagnosed with breast cancer. In August then I went forward and had an operation. I had a lumpectomy, but when they went in they actually discovered a second tumour under the original tumour. So I began a journey then which took me to the Mater Hospital, and up there I got lovely treatment and I was blessed and felt really well looked after. And I came back to Kilkenny then to oncology in Ottawa. Then when that was finished, I started my radiation course. And the type of cancer that I had, I was in treatment for a year. Obviously living in Kilkenny, so I would hear about Cois Nore, and I did know people that had been on a journey before and used the supports of Cois Nore. So one day I decided to make that phone call, and it was a great phone call to make. I then, after a while, took up the counselling service. And the reason I did, even though I have a wonderful partner and children, there are times where there's things you want to talk about that you don't want them to know, maybe your fear, because no matter how brave you are, there's always a fear in the background. You know, did they get it all? Will it come back? What's my life going to be like? How does it affect my family in their own minds? So I reached out and I started the counselling, and I get a phone call now every couple of weeks. And, you know, it's lovely to know that Cois Nore are still there for me, even though I finished my treatment, my big treatment, but I'm still on that journey.
It's funny, I think lots of people listening to this or watching it who are lucky enough not to have had to deal with this, when they think of how a cancer diagnosis is dealt with, they think of chemotherapy and radiation treatment, and they think of, I guess, the medical intervention, and that's all they think of. Maybe, you know, God, how are you going to juggle time off work, things like that. All of this sort of stuff in other people's minds is maybe secondary, and it's only when you speak to people like yourself who've been through it you realise how important all these services are as well.
Absolutely. And like when I got the diagnosis, obviously my children were the first thing that came to mind. How was I going to tell them? And at that particular time, my son wasn't in the country. He's a peacekeeper. And I had made the decision that I was going to tell the four of them together. So I made the hardest call I ever made in my life. And I had the four of them on WhatsApp. And I looked at his face and I knew his heart was breaking because he wanted to be there to support me. And he said, I'm coming home. And I said, no. I said, I'll need you when you're home to help me then. But for now, I'm okay. The girls are there. So for me, that was the hardest phone call. My partner was with me, and you know, he I suppose for him, he didn't know what to say or do. He was afraid to say the wrong thing because there is no right words that you can say to somebody. You can't say it's all going to be okay because nobody knows that. But by talking to the counsellors in Cois Nore, you were able to voice your fears for them and for yourself. And that's why it's really, really important to talk. You know, you have the worry of obviously telling your family, then you have the worry of your job, the financial end. You know, for me, I had to go to Dublin a couple of times, you know, once a week and once a month, and that's a financial strain when you're out of work. So, you know, for that counselling service to be there and the support service, because once, I suppose, you get your diagnosis and you start on the journey, you need that support financially and mentally. And I think mentally is one of the hard places for a person to go because of your fears and your worries about, you're worrying about everybody else and you put yourself on the backbone, you really do. And, you know, I'm a fairly strong person, but even I broke at times. And, you know, my daughter, when I finished my last treatment, which was a year to the day that I started, she said to me, you know, Mum, she said, you were sick at times, but you fought on. And she said, even strong women like you, she said, needed help. She said, you weren't strong all the time, but she said, you let yourself go, and that was okay, you know. And it's okay not to be okay, if that makes sense. And that's why it's good to reach out. And I will say, don't leave it too long to pick up that phone and ring Cois Nore, because their empathy and their caring nature down there is amazing. And when I used to go down for my appointments, I always went a few minutes early, and I used to sit in the foyer chatting, and I always brought a little treat, and they really appreciate that treat. And I'd have a cup of tea or a bottle of water, and it just made you relax that little bit more. So open that envelope, make that phone call. They're waiting, and they're absolutely amazing down there.
And the health is good today, Jackie?
Thank God. The health is good today, and I'm back working and living life to the full. As my mum used to say, put your lipstick on, get up and go out that door. And I do.
Fair play to her and fair play to you. Jackie, listen, thank you so much for
You're
sharing
welcome.
your story with us.
You're welcome.
Mervyn's story will be familiar to probably too many of you watching this, because that's the reality of cancer. It touches so many lives up and down this country every day. People deal with that diagnosis. And here to talk to me a little bit about that is Mervyn. Mervyn, you're very welcome, and thank you for taking the time to join us here. Tell me a little bit about Louise.
Like Louise's late wife was like in every house, the rock of the house, you know what I mean? Everything went through her. She was kind of the boss. And like she ran the household every day, chores, and she used to work herself then as well. And I was away working myself a good bit. And we had 5 children at the time, so busy household, as you can imagine.
Tell me about her cancer diagnosis then, when that came.
Roughly about 10 years ago. We think it was going on maybe a little while before that, but we're just, Louise being Louise, she used to fob these things off, you know what I mean? Or just, you know, I won't say ignored, but just, I mean, just daily life.
Life gets in the way.
Yeah, to go away, this thing or another.
So tell me about the point at which Cois Nore came on the scene, or how they helped.
A few months after that, Louise got contact with Cois Nore. My lads were young at the time. The youngest was 3, 9, 10 and 12, I think they were roughly at the time. And we went in and met all the staff in Cois Nore, and they suggested that for the likes of the younger ones, like play therapy and stuff. We went in and we met them all. We talked to them all. There was, they used to do things like drawings with them for the younger ones. Like the youngest lady was only 3 at the time. Like, it's very hard to explain till you're sitting there yourself. I sat there myself and watched them for the first few sessions, you know, to see them there and to actually talk to them, like stuff that they never said to me at home. And in fairness, I'm with the best one in the world to deal with that kind of stuff anyway, but to see them there, like your children so small, talking to strangers, as I say, they were able to coax words out, even just be drawings and stuff, you know what I mean? It was a great release for them, you know what I mean? Like, how to explain, it's just a step for so easy going with them, you know what I mean? They know how to deal with stuff like that, and as I said, they're able to talk to them and get their frustrations out, which they would never have said to me at home or any relations. So I couldn't recommend them enough that way, you know what I mean?
Tell me about the Writing for the Future project.
That was an initiative set up by Cois Nore again with Louise, and I know nothing of this till near the latter end of things, but it was basically a life story that Louise made in partnership with Cois Nore. There's elements of her life growing up, pictures of herself, her early years herself growing up. Then when we met, pictures all along on the storyline from start to finish, and then as the children came along, it was all incorporated in one big book, you know what I mean? And Cois Nore then produced 6 of those for us, so 1 for myself and 1 for each of the children. I have 5 in total, so as each of them hit 18, there's 1 for themselves. Like, no matter where they end up in the world, they can bring it with them. But like I say, there's lifetime memories in it and stories all along. Like even some of the stuff I saw myself, I didn't actually realise, you know, you just stuff, sometimes your memory just disappears, you know what I mean?
And those support services, I mean, how important did they become after Louise passed?
Oh, sure, unreal really, because unknown to yourself, the children begin to rely on them, you know what I mean? So to like a release for them to go in there and to be able to talk to someone, and like so I was often in there and I'd go have a cup of tea in a separate room, you know what I mean? And they were happy for me to go there, even though they knew I was only in the next door. But to just a channel for them to get their frustrations maybe or fears out of their system.
Kind of indirectly, it's therapy for you as well when you're sitting in that other room having a cup of tea, knowing the kids are getting
of
help,
course,
isn't it?
Definitely big time. Because I say I wouldn't be the best in the world myself to get my point across or that emotional stuff, being honest. But like I say, I was only in the room next door, and Cois Nore even often said to me, someday at work or you're going home from work and you just need an hour to yourself, there's a room here, just come in, have a cup of tea, sit in there on your own, you know, just chill out or take time out to think for yourself. But like I say, they're in the room next door and happy to know that they're able to get their just out of their system.
And for people dealing with a diagnosis, and it's like a diagnosis Louise had, it's life limiting, you know, that what do you say to those people in terms of reaching out? Because I can imagine them feeling like, you know, like the kind of world closing in around them almost, and they want to kind of pull up the drawbridge, and it's kind of an instinctual thing maybe, you know, when you're dealing with the worst news possible, not to want to engage with the outside world.
Oh, of course, it's like something like the films, you know, the circle of wagons, and you want to try to keep it in-house. Like I know everybody knows what's going on and people mean the best asking questions and stuff all the time. But sometimes you just need to be, like I say, a circle of wagons and just keep stuff in. But after a while then they say when we got in contact with Cois Nore, it was actually an inner release, you know what I mean, to be able to, let's say, bent up frustration or just to be able to release out from the system, you know what I mean, because you're built up with pent up frustration. And like Cois Nore were there every step of the way along the way as a massive help, you know what I mean, for especially my lads and Louise, you know what I mean. So
well, Mervyn, listen, I think, you know, there's a real value in hearing the story today because again, maybe it's family members often get forgotten about, you know, when we just, and all the effort goes into, understandably, all the effort goes into kind of, you know, and the focus goes into the person with the diagnosis. And, you know, it's just one of the kind of the range of services, the brilliant services that Cois Nore provide is to families. And even after the fact, after Louise's passing, that the service continues.
of course, and even to this day, we're still in contact with Cois Nore the whole time. And like many a person is saying, Kilkenny before, I passed up that street many a time, see the sign over the door, Cois Nore, never meant anything to me, just Cois Nore. Never thought of asking anybody what I meant or what it was. But unfortunately, as it comes to your door, you do find out then. But the range of services they do have, even the backup they have, you know what I mean, and time consideration and people and staff that are there, it's just a comfort, you know what I mean. As I say, to go in, just even peace and quiet at times, I mean, just to talk to them and the children, as I say, therapy and stuff. It's second to none, you know what I mean, service provided, so brilliant.
Mervyn, listen, thanks a million for chatting to us.
No bother, Kieran, thank you. Cheers.
Martina, you're very welcome. Thanks
Thank
a million. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing this spotlight onto such an important service for Kilkenny.
Well, no, listen, thank you. You're the people, yourself and Mervyn and Jackie are the people bringing the spotlight on it.
Real stories, yes.
So tell me a little bit about Sophie.
So my story is about my daughter Sophie. She's 9 now. She was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia when she was 7 in January 2023. So, as you can imagine, it just was like a nuclear bomb went off and only our family and our home were impacted by it. That's certainly how it felt at the time. And, you know, you go into that fight or flight mode, and as a parent, it's very different when you get a diagnosis like that for your child, and especially a child so young, because an awful lot of cover up and masking has to happen because, you know, we didn't know how to tell her what was wrong. And when she was diagnosed that night inside in St. Luke's through a blood test, they knew because there was so many blast cells in her blood, and, you know, it was I have to say it was the last thing that I would ever have imagined I was going to hear that night, because every child had been sick over Christmas that we knew of. All my nieces, nephews, her brother. She just seemed to be the same as everybody else, but she just wasn't pulling out of it. And when they started talking about cancer, I honestly was like, oh, here, don't be overreacting. But I remember the nurse manager on duty, Elaine, said to me, Martina, you know, you're going to come and you have to prepare yourself. And I said, would you go away out of that? And she said, no, it looks like it's leukemia. And I said, I thought you needed a bone marrow test, a biopsy to say it's leukemia. She said, you're absolutely right, you do. But we know by the amount of blast cells that are showing up. I'm like, what are blast cells? We were keeping a brave face on. She was feeling a bit better, you know, apart from the chemo, but telling her she was going to lose her hair, that's when the wheels came off, you know. And when
You're kind of telling her she's losing at that age.
Her identity.
Exactly. You took the words out of my mouth.
That's exactly what it was. And, you know, we were in St. John's Ward in Crumlin, the last place that any parent ever wants to find themselves, by the way. And there were and trying to keep in mind that there was worse cases left and right, and that there was something they could do about this, and trying to be grateful for where we live and the time we live and all that, while at the same time your heart's breaking and you can't be crying in front of her because, you know, she thinks then you were hiding everything. But I will never forget saying, you know, Sophs, we have to give you this medicine that's going to make you better, but it's going to make your hair fall out. And the first thing she said, and she's only 7, why would my hair fall out? Only people with cancer's hair fall out. And we had never said cancer because I didn't think she knew what it was. But those kids, they know
everything.
They know everything. And girls especially. I think Dylan, the older one, you know, he lives in a beautiful bubble. Dylan lives in everything's grand. But Sophie is so tuned in. And I didn't give enough respect for the amount that she did know. But that's for us when the wheels came off. And then she decided at that point she was going to take in the medicine. Why would she take it if it's going to make her hair fall out? But look, please God, when she's 10, by the time she's 11, we'll have all this over with. The end of 4th class, it'll be behind us, please God. But like the fear, I know Jackie mentioned it before as well, like when the treatment ends, it's not all suddenly over. Like I know I'm going to always have an anxiety in my chest. Like every little thing with her, I'll be asking myself, is it back? And I know that, like, even though our prognosis is incredibly good, you know, it comes back for 10% of all these children. So everything that ever happens, of course, the first question I'm going to ask is the cancer back? And Cois Nore gave me very good advice in the beginning, because I was in a bad place, I have to say, at that time, because I just felt in a few years, you know, Dylan, my oldest son, was born with congenital heart defects. He needed 2 open heart surgeries. My mother was diagnosed with motor neuron disease very young and died from that. And then Sophie, and I was very angry, and I did feel like, why does this keep happening to me? Why does this keep and I knew I was going to be in with Sophie for an hour every week, and I was kind of saying to Cois Nore, I need counselling now, I want to do this now, I'm going to be in here for an hour anyway. And they said to me, you know, you'd be better off waiting till the end and when you're through this journey. And I didn't get that, and I was like, but I don't understand, it's now I need this, it's now I need to talk to people. And do you know, when you're at home and you're trying to keep it all together and you're not going to be going around crying and bawling, I felt like I needed that. And their advice was, you know, that it's really afterwards. And now that I'm a year in, I really do see the benefit, and I see that they were absolutely right. And it's only now that all the other childhood cancer services are catching up to that, and they realise there's a gaping hole there, actually, and that an awful lot of families are falling apart at the end of treatment. And for the 2.5 years in our case, or whatever it is, for other children and their families, you're peddling like Billy O, and you're keeping your head down, and you're just trying to get to that finish line. And we know as a family how lucky we are. You know, that please God, she will be okay at the end of this. But that is not to say that the journey is not incredibly difficult. And just mentally taking care of your own mental health and trying to get Sophie through this with her self-confidence intact and her identity intact and not too damaged, like we are forever in the debt of Cois Nore.
And if you are going through, or someone you know is going through anything that we've just heard about, if you go to coisnore.ie, you can find out all about the services that they provide, or their phone number if you want to ring them directly is 056 77 52222. but coisnore.ie is the website, and you can find out about everything they do. So again, I know I'm repeating myself, but coisnore.ie if you want to reach out and lend a helping hand, or indeed if you think you know somebody, maybe yourself, maybe somebody in your family, maybe a friend, a colleague, who might be able to avail of those services, you want to find out more, that is the website. My thanks to Young Irish Filmmakers as well for the use of this space today. They are an absolutely brilliant organisation themselves, a national organisation operating out of this space in Kilkenny. They do Trojan work, and you should look them up when you have a moment as well. But can I offer our biggest thanks today to the three people who shared their stories with us, to Jackie, Martina and Mervyn. I think that anything I say kind of fades into insignificance when stacked against their testimony, the testimony of people who actually rely on those services. So thank you to them, and thank you for watching.